Thanks very much for joining us for the Intermodal Logistics Podcast. I'm Kevin Baxter, and I'm joined by my co-host for this edition, Intech Freight and Logistics President, Shelley Austin. Hi, Shelley.
Hi, Kevin.
How's it going?
Going well.
Yeah, right towards the end of January when we hit this one, and that means we're about a month into the tenure of our returning guest, who is now the President and CEO of the Intermodal Association of North America, IANA, and that's Anne Reinke. Anne, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. We had technical issues the last time, and one day we'll all not be confounded by technology. That day will happen after I'm dead. But for right now, we're all together.
Maybe AI will help. I don't know.
It's supposed to solve everything, right?
Yeah, just use a robot. Just use a robot instead of me. They'll say something equally as interesting.
Yeah, no.
When we tried to record this the first time, I wouldn't have been able to say anything about DeepSeek, but now that's happened in the last couple of weeks. So yeah, I mean, all sorts of stuff has changed.
I know. I put all my 401k into DeepSeek. Is that smart? I'm just joking. I didn't do that. I don't.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming back. We appreciate. We had you on in an episode early on in I think it was the summer of 23. Talking in your previous position with TIA President and CEO about broker fraud, but we'll get to that in a little bit. First of all, we didn't really do like a biography of you when we had you on the first time, and so wanted to back up and start with how you got into the industry in general and what led you into it and what you've done in the logistics freight space over the years.
Yeah, so nothing really led me into it except I was a lawyer doing the work of a trained monkey and I did not like it. And so I thought, okay, there's got to be something else I can do. And there's a newspaper article written by this guy who became my boss. And I remember this was years ago. I was in my 20s, and your mother still influences you at this point. My mother said, you should just go talk to that guy and see if they have a job. Well, I did. I called him up and I went in there and I said, hey, I'd love to work for you guys. It was like a small passenger rail association. And I didn't know anything about trains. I really didn't. And he's like, sure. I think by having a law degree and I didn't seem crazy, he decided to hire me. So I stayed there for 3 years. And I was looking for bigger and better things. So I applied to the Association of American Railroads, and they took me in. And that's when I started my whole freight love affair at AAR. And then CSX recruited me from there. And so I was there at CSX for 16 years doing government affairs, ending up heading up the whole government and state affairs department. We all know what happened at CSX. It was a fabulous exercise of precision scheduled railroading and hedge fund activity. I left and went to join the U.S. Department of Transportation in a political position. So I got to know other modes besides railroads, which was interesting because I love railroads, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But it was also interesting getting exposed to different modes and understanding all their ins and outs. And I can't say that I understand all modes ins and out, but I certainly got more familiarity with them. Knowing that the election was coming and feeling that it was going to be the way that it was, which it ended up being, I started looking around for another job, and TIA presented itself to me. And that's how I met Shelley and why we had this beautiful friendship. It's all because of TIA, because I was there for 4 years.
That's right.
And you served on the board.
I did.
Yes.
I served on the board and currently serve on the board of IANA.
Man,
so
just following each other around.
Yeah, and poor Anne can't get rid of me.
Shelley wants me to follow her. I will. I'll do whatever she wants me to do. I was not looking to leave TIA, but I was excited when I got approached about being, potentially the new president. They had the same president for 27 years. So I knew I had big shoes to fill.
So you mentioned you were with TIA for a few years. Now you've moved on over to IANA and following somebody who's been there a little bit. Actually, we had Joni on a few months before she finished out her time there. Obviously, an institution with IANA. So how do you follow that?
Yeah, how do you follow that? Well, so I would say this, she did a fabulous job at putting together an association that was, stitched together out of 3 different associations, as you may or may not know, and really coalescing around it and getting it to be the industry trade group. Without her ability to do that, we wouldn't exist, right? So she was the one who essentially said, this is our association. If you want to be in the intermodal space, you need to be part of the association. She did an incredible job managing the uniform intermodal interchange agreement, which is, a little technical subset of our association, and growing it and making it a really, really robust program. So I think if I were to distinguish between she and I would say she was on the business end of it, right? She was building it as an industry association, as somewhere where we could sort of coalesce around what's important for our business. Now, me coming in, my strength is more public facing. So we know who we are as an industry, but do others outside of our industry know us well enough? And I would argue that they don't. So we have an opportunity there, whether it's through PR and communications, whether it's through advocacy, whether it's through just, the media like this, through podcasts and LinkedIn and what have you. We have a real opportunity to showcase who we are, because ultimately our mission is to grow the market share of intermodal, right? And so how do we do that if people don't know about us? And so as we message ourselves, as we fan out on the hill, that is what we're doing, which is sharing the advantages of intermodal, sharing why it's such an important part of the supply chain. I would say one last thing, and this is close to Shelley's heart, is I think we can expand our educational offerings too. And I've said this to Shelley. I had a conversation with one of our board members who said, I would love to have a class where instead of me, when I have a new employee, sitting down and trying to train them, and I have 5 minutes to train them what the intermodal is, that I could take them to something that you offer as an association, Intermodal 101, which has a standard curriculum so that they would understand the sort of vast array of issues. We have 1 or 2 classes like that. We don't have a curriculum. And I think that's an opportunity for us as well as we think about the next generation of intermodal practitioners.
And you touched on something that I'm very passionate about and really enjoy. And I think one of the things, and I even thought about this at our most recent board meeting, is we talk so much and it, because it is extremely important to talk about the scholarship committee and what we do for the future leaders of the intermodal that are within, high school and college. But what we don't talk enough about and publicize is what we're doing for people that are already within the work industry and how we're helping them grow. And that's just what you mentioned. We need to have more courses that are available to help our membership with their new hires, or even somebody that may be moving from one position to another position. And one of those programs that I don't think we fully publicize well enough is the FLIP program. And if it, if it's okay, and again, off script, Shelley, always. But if we could just kind of put a little plug in for what that is, because I don't think enough people know about what that is. And I think it is amazing for people that are trying to build themselves within the intermodal industry. They're already in it, but they need to have more education and have that network to move forward in it.
Sure. So it's a Future Leaders of Intermodal program, basically. And what is exciting about it is these are people who are currently already working for some intermodal stakeholder, and their company is investing in them to say, we want you to get more familiarity with the people, with the practices, with what people are talking about, because we think there's potential for you to be a leader within the industry. And so what that showcases is, A, you have a company that's investing not only in the in IANA, but in the employee, and B, that the employee then gets that much more familiarity with the folks that are involved day to day in intermodal. And we get that through networking opportunities and through webinars and et cetera, so that they're not just thinking, okay, here's my day job. I finished my day job. I'm going home. It's, okay, what can I translate my day job into? Where can I grow with this in this company?
Yeah, and it's so cool because I know in my career, in the path of my career, I wouldn't be anywhere that I am without the people that I met and the network, and I continued to grow through that. And then you start serving on the boards and everything else. But there's only limited seats on a board, and what this brings is it brings that exposure to other people within your company to the same people, right? So it's still the exposure to the folks in the modes. There's opportunities, I believe, at Expo for this group. And so you literally get the same thing in building your network to where you can grow your career. So I love the program. I hope that we build on it more. But I don't want to lose sight of what we're doing at the college level as well. And I'm, we did a little bit in the high school. So we continue to go at all levels to make sure we're building, our future leaders.
Yeah. And I wish I'm sure I have this directionally correct. So forgive me if it's somewhat wrong, but I believe we've given out $15.9 million in scholarships since 2008 to kids, and they're kids to me because I'm a million years old, but kids who are at college and the graduate level to study the supply chain, to understand how to get involved in the industry. And once, when they get involved in the industry, they don't start at a deficit. They actually know a little bit about what they're talking about. And the fact that we can provide that opportunity is pretty incredible. The Joni Casey Scholarship Program.
Exactly.
Sure, we say that. Yes.
Give some props to that for certain. Well, that's wonderful. So yeah, I did take a little segue there, but I think it's extremely important, and it really highlights some of the future opportunities for IANA and what we can do. And I really like the fact that you said the transition from the amazing things that Joni did to what the opportunity lies ahead with what you can do with the organization. Is amazing because the structure has been built. It's a very sound structure. Now we need everybody to know how awesome IANA is. That's my word.
That's right. Well, I mean, she really has stood me in good stead because the association is sound. It's, we're viable, we're growing, we have a revenue stream. We don't have these kind of structural issues that a lot of associations suffer from in any event, but certainly have suffered from through COVID. And so the fact that I'm taking over from a position of strength is truly a gift, because it means that we do have an opportunity to do some of the things I talked about, the advocacy, the PR, et cetera. We're fortunate that we have those resources.
Absolutely.
So you talked about the intermodal market share issue. Where does it stand for those who don't know right now? And what do you see as the opportunity? Like, how much can it cut into that percentage, the deficit that it has right now?
Sure. So I will say this: we did end the year 2024. December 2024 was better than December 2023, both internationally and domestically. Probably part of that is because there was a lot of folks moving containers in anticipation of a labor strike, which fortunately did not occur. Yeah. But we benefited from that. But, the American economy is still strong. The retail sales are still good. People are still buying. The employment is still good. We are at an advantage. When I think about the future, though, we need to grow market share. We're at something like 5.5%, Shelley, if we think about the freight marketplace writ large.
Right.
How do we grow that? Well, a couple ways. And I'm going to be a name dropper for a second, but I met with Joe Henricks last week, the CSX president, who, if you read his interview in Railway Age, is incredibly bullish about intermodal. And the reason he's incredibly bullish about intermodal is what I just said. The consumer is still spending, still feels confident in the American economy. We think there are deflationary pressures. The inflation is, we hope there's optimism it will go down. The employment rate is still good. And we're becoming, as we all know, more of a service rather than a manufacturing economy. And so the potential for shifting traffic, diverting it to us, to intermodal, exists. we have to rely on rail service being good. And I think it has improved certainly from where it was during the pandemic. We have to rely on not having changes in the regulatory structure, for example, that would eliminate the independent contractor model. That is a necessity. And I think we want to be cautious that there aren't things like tariffs and other things that could potentially make the flows go down. But otherwise, I think we have a real opportunity to convert that traffic to intermodal, and I think it behooves us to do that.
So, Anne, one of the things that it kind of was a tagline before, we kind of held on to it, but now I think it's starting to become more crucial, is the sustainability piece of intermodal as well, right? It was always just as if it's the cheaper service, and it still should be a more economical service, in my opinion. But I think there's an add to that, as long as as you mentioned, as long as the railroads have the service where they need to be, there is that piece of sustainability that adds to the price of the mode, to where a lot of shippers need to make sure that they're following that. What are your position on that, and kind of what do you see? Do you see the same thing, that there's a lot of people moving toward that?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, look, the political winds are always changing, and so it's a little bit. I wouldn't say we're anti-sustainability with this administration, but the sustainability, let's just say it's not as important. That being said, though, there are still any number of built-in incentives already that exist for cities, counties, states to develop intermodal facilities, because there is this kind of multimodal sustainable prerogative that still exists. That hasn't changed. The law hasn't changed.
Right.
And so I think that's something we can still take advantage of. And they're to be kind of weedy about it, in the weeds. The Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill comes up every 5 to 7 years, depending on when those congressmen can get their arms around it. So it's supposed to expire next year, and that is a hotbed of potential for not only recognizing the importance of intermodal, but planning around it, planning for potential grant programs that sustain intermodal. This is something that we should be sort of moving ahead with. I think sustainability is still important to, let's call it, half the country, and still important to, let's call it, most of the federal programs. Again, you can be in favor of a program, and depending on the audience, talk about which aspects of it you support. So for maybe one audience, you really talk about the seamlessness of the supply chain and how critical that is. And another audience, you talk about the sustainability and taking trucks off the road. It really sort of doesn't, both are true, but maybe emphasize one over the other.
Agreed.
Speaking of, talking about the legislation coming up, one thing that you've mentioned as sort of a goal for IANA is to get a little more active on the Hill, something that you were very much in TIA. But how are you seeing that playing out in the next several months, years?
Yeah, so I think I said this earlier on. When I went up on the Hill and had a couple introductory meetings, there are some staff who do transportation, and they do it every day, who don't know the Intermodal Association of North America. They may kind of conceptually understand what intermodal is, right? Because they're not dumb people like intermodal. They can probably figure it out, but they don't necessarily know what IANA does. And that to me seems like, well, let's change that. I think that's probably one of the reasons why I was hired, because I have been an advocate for so long, and it's a comfort that I have. It's an understanding and appreciation of how the system works. To me, nobody loves the word lobbyist, but everybody loves to be advocated for. And if you're not up there, then how do you, I just blathered on about that surface transportation program. How are they going to know about intermodal if we're not up there talking about intermodal? Is somebody else up there for me? No. I mean, we are it. So if we're not up there, how are we going to think about, advocating for programs and funding streams and everything else, or even just having a freight, a state freight plan actually includes some language around intermodal. Even just having that inclusiveness of language is enormously supportive. How can we do that if we're not up there? So, lobbyists, you always think about these like fat cats who like throw dollar bills down the drain. That's not the kind of lobbying that we're doing. What we're trying to do is be at the table so that they know who we are. And God forbid, these folks, 535 of them, they have so many issues they're dealing with. I mean, just, we just talked about, there's a plane crash yesterday. They now are all having to become experts on aviation safety, which they're probably not, but they have some 25-year-old staffer who's advising them. They need to hear from people who are experts in this field. And so we are the experts in intermodal. We need to be up there teaching them.
Yeah, and speaking of some of those things, something that we spoke about when you were at TIA, and again, there's so many things that are TIA, IANA, they kind of collaborate on. It's very similar in what happens. So I think that's why it's such a nice, easy transition. But one of the things we have to be really standing up for and making a presence on is this cargo theft and the fraud. I would say it leans a little heavier on the fraud with the truck industry. When I say fraud, I mean somebody posing as somebody they're not. But ultimately, it all ends up with theft. And so, there is still a lot of theft within the intermodal space. And we need these, be standing up there to make sure that the proper authorities are pushing on these and making it something that they can't just get away with and go right back out and do it again, because that's what's causing our problems. And so those are some of the things that we really need to stand up for.
You're exactly right. And Shelley, we talked about this last week when I went and met some Jacksonville members of the association, and to a meeting, they all brought up cargo theft because it seems solutionless, right? We're not getting a ton of help from federal authorities. They're not getting a ton of help from state authorities. Who's helping us, right? So the thought is, all right, well, if no one's helping us, let's help ourselves figure out some best practices, educating ourselves on how to find solutions, whether it be technology, whether it's security, whatever it is. And then also advocate for change. So doing that is perhaps part of a larger coalition. There are a number of associations that have developed a cargo theft working group. We now will have a cargo theft working group. TIA was first with its fraud task force, and they were sort of ringing the bell, the canary in the coal mine 3 years ago. Again, you're right, Shelley. They're more focused on fraud as opposed to intermodal, which really focuses on theft. And that's probably part of the reason is because we have the UIIA program, right, which kind of prevents us not knowing who we're doing business with. But yeah, I mean, we can work with the National Retail Federation. We can work with the Retail Industrial Leaders Association, work with AAR. There are any number of entities that are experiencing this, and great minds can come up with pressure and solutions.
Yeah, and I think, Anne, as we talked about getting the exposure out there, and especially to the shipper community, this is one big thing that we can put right in front of the shipper community because it impacts them directly. It's their product, and it is a horrible situation for them. Even if you you file a claim, you can do your process to get the money, so on and so forth, but they literally have been disrupted within their supply chain. They don't have the product they need to get to market. I mean, these are things that are straight right in the face of the shippers, and it makes a big difference if they know that IANA is standing up to the plate to say, hey, we're fighting against this.
That's right. And to your point about the shippers, I think there has been a gradual awakening from the shippers that they are part of the solution too, in that this is not just the sort of transportation problem. This is a theft fraud problem that can happen in any part of the supply chain. Again, if maybe for the brokers and the motor carriers, it's like right when you're handing off the shipment of whatever it is. And for us, it's on the end, sort of when we're supposed to be delivering it. Doesn't matter. We all need to be part of it. Doesn't matter where we are in that, supply chain transaction.
Exactly.
So we did have you on to talk about the more on the fraud side, I would say, back the first time you were on this podcast. So where do you think things are now? I mean, you mentioned that the authorities are still, there's still not a lot of enforcement activity out there, but how much progress do you think there has been? You mentioned the working groups. What are some other ways that things have progressed, and what are some ways that are maybe still especially alarming to you on the fraud and then the theft front too?
Yeah. So if you think about what is it, the finger in the wall of the flooding wall and everything.
Yeah.
So I would say we've got it's not now drowning us, but there's still a lot of water coming out. Here's what's changed for the better. One is there's a lot of heat, light, and thunder about it. People are not unaware now, and the number of industries that I just mentioned are talking about this. So that is a vast improvement. There are two pieces of legislation that could potentially help that will likely be reintroduced. There are regulatory agencies that are at least taking this seriously now. Could they move faster? Yes. Could they change their registration systems, for example, so it's less porous and easy to manipulate? 1,000%. But it's better.
I like better.
Better is better.
At least we're not going the other way. So thank you for giving us some hope that we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and I would just one other thing too is the enforcement side, the federal and state enforcement. The FBI has now awoken to this issue too, and they are talking to many. I know they're talking to some TIA members. I know they've talked to some IANA members. So they're keeping track of this. Does that mean that everything is resolved and we've got the white horse and they're charging in and they've taken names? No, but having them at least as part of the discussion where they've had some meetings with folks who have been affected, that's progress as well.
With the issue, obviously we've had a stretch of a couple of years here where the market's been down. So has that brought it into an even more stark relief for some entities or some brokers, some carriers have been struggling a little bit anyway, and so then you have the added issue of the margins get smaller. They're not swimming in profits as much as before. Is it something that you've seen actually affect exits in the market?
Yeah, unfortunately so. I mean, Shelley, I think you've seen this too, where there are companies that have closed down because of fraud. I think of 3 specifically, or changed their practice completely because the brokerage was too much of a challenge for them. And so they sort of got out of the brokerage and they decided to just concentrate on technology. And it's unfortunate that that's the case, but these can be bet the company risks, particularly if you have a really high value load. And, if you pay the insurance out and you're taking responsibility for it, that means that it can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. And a lot of these companies, to your point, have very thin margins. It has not been a profitable couple of years necessarily. And so it's just maybe too much. And so they feel like they have to close their doors. It's an unfortunate side effect of this fraud and theft.
It is. It's unfortunate. And I think there's that side of the exits. And then as you look at the in our space in intermodal, there's been some exiting of the dray carrier space, but that's not so much, I don't think. I think that attributes a lot to back in the pandemic days, a lot of drivers decided to become their own company because it was beneficial for them. And so you had this huge rise in what were companies in MC numbers, and then maybe we haven't lost all those folks. They've just gone back to a larger organization, so it looks like we've had this huge reduction, but it really is just more consolidation. So I think that we look at that too, right? We have the folks that are just it's unfortunate they couldn't make it in the market, or there's the big consolidation, because you see a lot of that when things like this happen. Then it starts being everybody joins as one bigger company than the individual companies.
Oh, I think that's right. I mean, you think about if you were an independent driver and you just can't make the payments on your truck anymore, just by doing business yourself, then yeah, you're going to go try to find a job from a larger carrier. That's the way it is. And so all, as we know, these drivers have very thin margins, and if if the prices have been as flat as they are, they're not getting what they hope to get, it's really, really tough to make a go of it. So then you want the security potentially of a larger, being a company driver.
Absolutely.
So talking about the independent drivers, you mentioned earlier there are some issues in California particularly, but other areas are batting things around that are having those kind of implications with the owner operators potentially having to be brought in as an employee, benefits, things like that are there are positives and negatives, but tell us where that situation is right now in terms of where the AB5 was one of the things in California, but there's other things out there as well.
Yeah, so AB5 has survived a number of court challenges to it. So it is the law in California.
Mm-hmm.
And that provides this ABC test, which essentially there's no way you can prove you're not an employee if you take this ABC test. It's like 3 steps to show that you're an employee, even if you don't want to be an employee. And so the truckers got caught up in that. It was never intended to even affect truckers, but as most terrible bills are, they have these unintended consequences. But my understanding from, and Shelley, you heard this too, AB5 and that, the independent contractor status is actually not being enforced in California for whatever reason. And maybe it's because there aren't people who are really checking on it. There's not people turning each other in. It's certainly the drivers aren't going to turn themselves in. So why would they? So that's on the state side. On the national or the federal side, the Department of Labor we've had this whipsaw effect with the last administration. The Trump administration developed this 2-part test to determine whether you're not an employee. It was pretty simple. And then the Biden administration said, no, we don't want a 2-part test. We want a 6-part test, which is really complicated. And so it'll be interesting to see now that Trump is back. Are they going to go back to the 2-part test? Are they going to forget the 6-part test? I really don't know. The nominee for the Department of Labor is a supporter of having a nationwide sort of AB5 called the PRO Act. But will she follow what Trump wants to do? All of that gets into this kind of maelstrom of politics and switching allegiances and where unions are and who they support and blah, blah, blah. So it's all kind of above our pay grade. I will say this, the most conservatives, and we had a meeting today with one, conservatives on the Hill are still supporters of the independent contractor model because they know it provides freedom. Why would the government tell you if you should or should not have your own business? I mean, that fundamentally is a problem.
So you mentioned that as sort of a barrier to intermodal growth. How is it a barrier if something like that gets implemented, a nationwide AB5?
Yeah, so 80% of the dray drivers are independent contractors. So where does that population go?
Yeah,
right.
And there's not a lot of big companies in the dray space. So who's going to be driving those trucks?
Yeah, and I think the important thing to mention, and going back to what I mentioned during pandemic times and then the consolidation, you're not eliminating the independent contractors. They're still there. They just can run through another company. Most of your big dray companies, they are a mix of independent contractors and company drivers. And they operate just fine. And there's no difference. There's absolutely you talk to them and there's no difference in the service. There's no difference in how they perform. It's just, it's critical to have both. Because I think that any of the companies that you talk to, that's what makes them successful, is to be able to have that mix of independent contractors and company drivers. It's funny because I'm going to put a plug in for the expo and the case competition. But the case competition that we did this past year in 2024 was just that. It was all about independent contractors and company drivers and what was better and what wasn't better and which way would you go. And it was interesting how the college students didn't totally understand what an independent contractor was and what the function that they provided. And this is why our education is so important to the schools and also just people in the industry, because there's a misunderstanding of what they actually are and what how they perform in our industry. And I think that's why it's so important. So I just had to put a plug for that because I thought that I think every case competition is amazing. I get to judge it. I love it. But it's very interesting to see how people think of things when it's not really kind of exactly what it is in the real world.
No, I think that's right. I mean, what a great point too, that these people have their own agency. It's not the company dictating how they want to operate. It's the individual deciding how they want to operate. That shouldn't be lost in the messaging.
So we've talked about some of the heavier issues, and then I mentioned before we were going to do more biography. We started with that, but let's bounce.
So we're gonna end. We're gonna end with it too. All right.
Nice little bookend.
I like that.
So you mentioned, I think briefly earlier with CSX. Was that really the time that you got into the railroad side of things as sort of a passion beyond just being in the industry in general?
Yeah, I don't know what happens to you. It's like if you're a farmer and all you can think about is dirt. It's like you join a railroad and all you can do is talk about the railroad. And believe me, I still talk to my CSX pals and all we do is talk about the railroad. It's amazing. Like, do they ask me maybe a couple of questions about how I'm doing? Sure. But really, I don't even want to talk about myself. I want to talk about the railroad. It is endlessly fascinating. And I don't know why that is. I can't explain it. Maybe it's not like I had a train set when I was a little girl. I mean, this does not come from, birth, but it just sort of sweeps over you. I mean, Shelley, you may feel the same way. It is just such an interesting industry. It is different every day. I worked for 16 years of CSX. I never was bored. Never one day was I ever bored. Now, sometimes I was real mad or frustrated, but never bored.
Yeah, I was on with Brent Hutto yesterday on Freight Nation. I got my spot on Freight Nation. And I was telling him the same thing. It's just this huge passion that you have, and it never gets boring because it's complicated. There's so many parts and pieces to it that is different every single day, and it gives you the capability to create a new solution for your customers. So it's not always just the same thing, and not everyone can do it. Intermodal, you can take this part here and put it to this piece here, or you can do this here and put it to that piece there. And that's why I love the IANA organization, because we sit with all the stakeholders of how you create that solution. And so we're all collaborating together to do something phenomenal for the customers, for the end solution. But we all have to work together to do it. There's not competition, it's collaboration.
That's right. You know what? Let's interview you again, Shelley, instead of me. Shelley for president.
Oh no.
She was already chair of the board. She can't be president again.
I know, I can't be president again. Gosh darn.
You can in like another 10 years when everyone's already forgotten. Let's just do that.
Oh yeah, no, we don't want to see
that.
Well,
you could probably influence the rules on that, right? A little bit, term limits. I think there's some legislation on that too.
We don't want to mess with those bylaws. Let me tell you, Kevin.
We just did mess with that bylaws. We created the Safety and Security Committee. It's really good. It's really good.
I was so happy to see when it came through. I was like, yes.
It's really good. Good for us.
Yes.
So was that part of the interest then? We mentioned TIA is a little bit more focused on the truck side than rail, but so when you see IANA having this opportunity, was that part of it there? A little bit of that love for the railroad maybe creeping back in?
Yeah, I guess so. It's like I'm a sucker. I couldn't stop myself, but I really do enjoy those issues. Not to say that I didn't enjoy my 4 years at TIA. I really did. And I do feel like learning a new industry is something that was not only a challenge, but also really exciting to figure out kind of the ins and outs of an industry that I was completely unfamiliar with. But I had this part of my brain that was like my railroad station, and I kept wanting to use it. And I would tell these railroad stories to my employees and my staff at TIA, and they're all like, rolling their eyes like they could be. All right, we get it. Used to work for a railroad. So, yeah. So yes, I'm a sucker. What can I say?
You have a better audience than now, a more engaged audience when you tell the stories.
Yeah, maybe it was just the stories I was telling. Maybe I need to tell better stories. Yeah.
So I think initially when we were going to do this interview, it was a little earlier on in your time, but now you have like pretty much a month under your belt. So how's the first month?
Expert. I'm an expert.
How's the first month gone for you?
It's been great. I've had an opportunity to meet all the board members. We just had our first board meeting and I sat down with all of them virtually. I sat down with all of them. I met with all the staff except I think there's one staff that I haven't met. And my whole hope there is to understand their perspectives. I have my own ideas of what I would like to see. I've already explained sort of my vision, right, which is to really amp up our public facing kind of presence. But I also want to hear a little bit on their perspective of what they'd like to see from IANA, what their hopes and dreams are too. Because, I don't know what I don't know yet. So it's helpful to understand a little bit more context and where we've had some successes, where we've had some failures, where it would be good to try something new. And I won't know that unless I listen to the various people who have been part of this organization for as long as they have.
So when the meeting, who scheduled Jacksonville? Is it always Jacksonville?
No, but it is always, at least for the January meeting, a warmer climate.
Theoretically.
Supposed to be.
Right? Yeah.
Yes. But it didn't turn out that way. As we all know, we'll just say Shelley didn't pack appropriately.
She did not. Shelley did not pack appropriately.
No, not for Jacksonville, no. Well, okay, to my defense, really. I thought I would be getting in a car into a restaurant with heat or from a car to a place with heat, and there was just no heat. The hotel had no heat in the lobby, no heat in the hallways. It was just... I didn't take my parka. I'm sorry.
We all learned something, Shelley. We learned something.
We do, but it really is a great place for the meeting, Kevin, to your question.
Right.
So, we are very fortunate. Mary Claire, who's on our board with the CSX, she hosted it this year, and typically it's in a nice climate for January.
Mm-hmm.
And then alternate years, we've been very fortunate as well. Barbara Melvin's on our board, and she is with the Port of Charleston, and so we're able to. I did get that right, Anne. I didn't miss on that, right?
No, you didn't miss. No, you're great.
So we are fortunate that like the previous year we've had it there. We've had it there a couple of times in another great environment, typically in January. So I honestly think just last week, as anybody that's listening to this, there's not a single place that didn't get rocked. In the whole South, and any place you probably thought you were going to a good destination, you weren't going to a good destination. So
that's right. But we had a great meeting. We accomplished some good things. I'm really excited. I can't wait to be on your show next year when I'm going to talk about all the stuff we've done and the stuff we still yet to do. So ask me again next year. This time next year.
That will be exciting.
Yeah, we'll put it on the calendar, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to live in Florida, and I have a lot of people down there, and they were very confused by the white stuff that was coming down.
1,000%.
So yeah, no one was planning on it.
No.
A little bit of a freak out.
But I will mention, we had negative temperatures, so even the cold in Florida was not as bad as what we were at home.
Yeah, you were just like looking at the temperature differences and going like, this is going to be warm.
Yeah, I was
one way or the other.
Hey, jacket, I'll be fine. Yeah, I learned my lesson. So at least I could be comic relief for everyone that was there. And if I can be that, I'll take it.
Well, thanks y'all. I appreciate you.
Yeah, tell us where people can go to find out more about IANA. I think you have something coming up fairly soon here too, right?
Yes, we have a business meeting in May 5th through 7th in Kansas City, Missouri. And this is for people who really want to get into sort of the nuts and bolts of how to improve intermodal from, operations perspective, from a safety perspective. It's really where all our committees engage. And then we have our big expo where the who's who of Intermodal in September in Long Beach. And I'm trying to remember, it's September 15th through 17th. I don't want to get that wrong, Shelley, but I think that's right.
I think you're right. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll make sure
and then intermodal.org. Intermodal.org. Come and look at it. Feel free to contact me. Anne Reinke at intermodal.org. Oh, it's A Reinke. I'm sorry, it's A Reinke. A Reinke at intermodal.org.
We'll get all that in the description. So yeah, appreciate it. Again, thanks very
y'all.
much for taking the time.
Thanks, Anne.
I appreciate it.
So we hinted at it a little bit. We've been chasing this for a little while. We actually started an interview a couple of weeks ago, but really glad that we were able to get this in. Anne's a great guest, and it's great to learn, not only a little bit more about her background, but what the vision is as she's just getting going in IANA.
Yeah, I love her excitement. I love her passion. I think there's just so many opportunities for all of us in the intermodal space, and an organization like IANA is there to make sure that we all get to the right place and everybody knows what we're doing and how we're moving that industry forward.
And so, again, thank you to Anne for joining us. We'll have those links in the description to tell you about the dates, the contact info, and, of course, the website. And our website, if you'd like to learn more about us, is www.intechfreight-logistics.com. If you have any questions related to the podcast, it's podcast@intechlogistics.com. If you're watching or listening, wherever you get your podcasts, please do rate and review us, comment, subscribe, follow, all those things. You can do them all together if you want, maybe do them separately, whatever. But we appreciate you taking the time to join us. And for Shelley, I'm Kevin. We'll be back next time.